It's always fun for me to invite myself for the conference, so here we are. Let me introduce the next speaker, Andrzej Krzywda. Today I would like to talk about DDD, obviously, so domain-driven design, and I will talk from the perspective of the code that we all write the same. So, yes, we all work on different project types. So maybe some of you work on e-commerce. It's popular nowadays to work on edutech, so courses, teaching, learning, and stuff. So probably your application is somewhere there or somewhere between those, or maybe it's not that far from those. There are different types of projects, but we solve still very similar problems. If you talk to each other, if you look at the code bases that we have together, it's very, very similar concepts. So we all solve the same problems in the code. So for example, who here has a column or a concept of a price in your project? I'm pretty sure many of you are lying if you don't have a price. Like, what exactly is your tool doing if you don't have a price? So you have a domain of pricing in your business, in your project. Similarly, yes, if you have a login, you have authentication. If you have an address, you probably have shipping. If you have a concept of available products or you're selling some e-commerce stuff, you have a concept of inventory. And if you have a concept of payment, you have a domain of payments. And if you have a concept of a tax rate, maybe, then you have a domain of taxes. And if you have a concept of invoices, invoicing. If you have a concept of dates, generic dates, you have a domain of calendar. So anyone here had at least one of those? Okay. More than 3 of those, like more or less. Okay. So we have very similar concepts in our Rails applications. And I just made a list of 14 for some reason. There is like, I don't know, 20 maybe of them. And typically you have many of those, or at least half of those. And then you have, oh yeah, the pink ones were important. So the pink ones are the ones where is your so-called core domain, so the domain where actually your business is unique, because probably your business is not unique in the terms of like how you deal with pricing or how you deal with shipment, or maybe it is. But usually we have some other ones which are not so typical. So those are the ones where we should focus on, and the ones which are above are boring, and we shouldn't write them all the time. Yeah, so we all solve the same problems in code, but somehow we do it differently. So again, the diagrams, we see the same everywhere, but the code is very, very different. So why is our code different? Because our code basis is Rails, so we have, I hope it works, we have models, we have views, and we have controllers. The views recently changed into some kind of JSON views, so maybe JSON serializes, but hopefully with Hotwire we'll be back with views. And now the question is, who has service objects? Who has service objects in the code? Yes, that's quite a lot. I like service objects, but sometimes I don't like them. But I have to defend them, because 10 years ago I was one of the people advocating service objects, so I have to be honest with myself. The service objects introduce interesting debates in projects. I wonder if you have them, or if you've had them. First of all, do you call them services, commands, operations, actions, interactors, scenarios? Many different names for that, but the same concept. Apotonic is here? I can have fun from that Trailblazer, okay. So yeah, how to name them. The second way of naming is exactly what's the naming convention. So do you have like a class called register user service? Or maybe just register user? Okay, users register, okay. Some people like to also have debates about call versus execute. What's the answer? Call. Yeah. How many debates were in your team about that? It's quite a lot, probably. How to group them? So some people like to group the services into like user service class, and then you have register and delete user, and like more like methods. So another debate. What do they return? That's the one that I was. Heated debates were here. Like, what does a service object return? A, nothing. B, the last record that was changed. C, true or false, because we like active record. What else? Monad, yeah, success or failure. Yeah, so that's, I'm not giving answers here. How to communicate failures? Monads. What else? Return false or use exceptions, but the exceptions are slow. Can they call other services? Can a service object call another service object? How to test them? Okay, that's an easy one. Do you mock everything out, or do you test many services at once? Another debate. I'm not giving answers yet. And do we use them in tests to set up the state of the application in integration tests, or do we still rely on some kind of gems for creating active records directly? No answers. Okay. Yeah, and the one that I like, so the params-driven development. Usually the service object, they takes a bunch of params, and the params just flow through the whole system, and at the end they are saved somewhere, right? So that's the typical flow. Service objects are, are not enough. That's my honest way of escaping this way that I advocated them. But 10 years ago, when I was experimenting with service objects, and that was like my entry into the domain-driven design world, I called them a gateway drug. So that's a starting point, and those questions are good to have because you see that the answers are not easy to find. So let's go further. I've seen many Rails modularization attempts in the existing projects. Concerns, DHH. Microservices. Who went with microservices? I'm sorry for you guys. Who went with engines? Okay. Adrian is so nice that I can't really. Engines actually suck. Trailblazer. That's a very popular one, actually. So Nick is not here, so I can tell you a secret. I see many code bases where if you make some Git archaeology, you will see that someone introduced Trailblazer and then removed it. So Kafka. Yeah, I know the company you work for. Yeah, so the problem with all those choices is that they can be good, but they can be wrong. And usually they're wrong because there is one important assumption that many of us make. And the assumption is that it's enough to have one level of modularization in our whole application. So we try to cut our application into, for example, engines, right? And the engine contain everything. And there was this question about buyers and sellers today. So do they contain the models together or not? And how to deal with this? So the problem is that this is, regardless of how you choose the modularization attempt, there is more than one modularization layer, unfortunately. You have at least 2 layers in your application. And that's a big simplification here, but I think we can fit many of those into application layer or domain layer. So let's see how it works. You have app layer, domain layer, and the application layer has its own separation, its own modularization. And for example, what would we put here? This is a mystery. We would put here stuff like admin panel, or the main application that we work on. Or we would add the mobile API, because that's a different application. Or we would put the integration with Shopify, for example, because many projects nowadays integrate with Shopify, so you have to have some kind of a application layer for this. Or you have GraphQL. Who has GraphQL? that sucks too. It's possible to deal with GraphQL, fortunately. So basically, at this layer, we have controllers, and we have service objects. That's the main building blocks. So service objects belong to the application layer. We have one answer here today. And then we have domains, and we have those black boxes, like pricing, inventory, and all the boring ones that I mentioned, plus the pink ones, which are interesting for you. And we have read models. Pavel introduced this concept yesterday during the event sourcing talk. Read models are the persisted views. So the stuff that is displayed is usually eventually consistent. So for example, in admin panel, we would like to display all products, regardless if they're available or not. In the public application, we display all products, but only the available ones, so that's a different read model. So we will use a green color to say that there is like all products, there is ledger, there is all orders, thanks, and month reports, so all the financial stuff. Maybe you have more applications for the salespeople, so this is stuff like this. So read models also belong to the application layer. Then we have maybe some other stuff, like for example, for Shopify integration, maybe you use the webhooks, and you will have those service objects. In all these apps, you will have service objects. Some people find it tempting to reuse service objects between the applications. I would say it's better not to create such coupling. It's better not to have those service objects being reused. It's better to have a focus, okay, which part of the application you are changing and which service object is responsible for that. So what are the domains here? Because that was the topic. Domains are functions. Hello, Norbert. Norbert will have a talk about functional programming tomorrow. So domains are functions from commands to events. So you will, commands is an input and events is an output. So if you have a pricing domain, you will have an input consisting of certain commands. Those commands are very granular if you look at them. So it's like setting price, setting discount, removing discount, activate time promotion. Everything related to pricing is here. And the output is very similar events as the commands. So the number of them is very similar. It's not complete pricing domain, but this is the stuff that you would usually add to the pricing module, the pricing domain. The next thing. Your application layer belongs to the Rails application. Service objects, I think it's fine to put them in app services, or if you use engines, we generate those different directories at the top, so you can group those stuff in engines. By the way, I added form objects as well, so I forgot about Nick. So this is in the directory of your Rails application. I think it's a good idea to keep it together. However, and this is shocking, the domain layer does not belong to your Rails application. This is your business logic and has nothing to do with Rails, to the point that it even shouldn't be part of your Rails directory. So how can this work? On the left side, you see a directory structure of a project where the e-commerce directory is a list of domains, no dependency to Rails. And then you have Hanami application and Rails application. And let's forget about the infra stuff. So the Rails application, on the right side, you see the structure more or less. It's made up, but mostly it's like I want to show you that there is this structure of apps in the Rails application. You group stuff like forms, read model, services together, and you will have separate stuff for each of them. And then you have domains, which are in the e-commerce directory. In my case, it was e-commerce directory, and they have no Rails dependency. They don't use active support. You can run tests without having Rails and stuff, so they are almost without dependencies. The only dependencies are you need some stuff about events and commands. So in my case, I'm using Rails Event Store, but you can use whatever you like. So we have some commands like set price, which just takes product ID and price. We have order ID and amount for set percentage discount. So those are commands. Those are events. Very similar, very small if you look at them. And you need something to publish those events from the domain. Usually you would have some concept of aggregates, but not everyone likes them, so you can have whatever code you like. Basically, you need something that is responsible for taking a command and publish events if it's possible to handle this command. So if someone tells me, hey, I would like to I would like to set percentage discount, we would like to allow this only if there was no discount before. So if there was a discount before, we would like to first remove the discount and only then add a new one. So that's it can fail sometimes. If it fails, it raises an exception. And this is an example code which is very, very simple because there is no business logic really. It's basically a product class which when you set a price, it allows it because it's always possible to set a price. And here is a bit bigger example where you have an order in the pricing module where it contains all the products, it contains all the discount which is applied for this order. And at the bottom, you can see that you can't assign 2 discounts, so it will raise an exception. So this is a way of dealing with the business logic. So that's how we will implement those domains, the typical domains, and also your domains. That's how it can be solved. And the building blocks are, again, commands, events, and the domains at the domain level. The read models are very simple. Usually they are one table because they are displaying like a box of data. And this is a DSL I came up recently with. So we are just declaring that this read model, oops, I promise not to go there. The read model subscribes to those events you can see in the call method, so product register, product name, stock level change. You can see those events come from different namespaces, from different modules, from different domains. So that's why read models live in the application layer, because they don't belong to one specific domain. And you just declare, okay, from which event attribute you map the data to which column in the database. That's very easy. Okay, so now is the fun part. Because maybe you will ask a question about how the domains communicate exactly. Because the domains, they don't know about each other. It's not necessarily a rule. They can know about each other, but this coupling that you will introduce will make everything just ugly, because it's no longer a map from commands to events. It's additional coupling added. And ideally, you would like to use those domains without adding the next one required. So what is the solution to the problem that the domains, they don't know about each other, but somehow they need to collaborate in order to do anything? And what is the anything that we need to do? The anything is that businesses have processes. Usually, you would like to capture those processes when the business explained to us how things work. We would like to have this in the code so that whenever they change the rules, we know where to change it. Processes coordinate domains, and processes map events onto commands. So at the technical level, at the abstract level, they are business processes. But at the technical level, they react to certain events, and they do something as a result. So if you look at how business people communicate stuff to you, very often it's about checklists. So whenever A and B and C happens, we do X in our business. Very often it's very simple processes, like whenever A happens, we just do X in our business. So that's a very simple thing. For example, whenever we rename products, we let invoices department know about it, because on the invoices we should have the right name for the product. In some projects, you will have a separate name for invoicing. You don't copy it from the product catalog. You just have a separate product name just for invoicing. Which means we have something like this in our code base. We have a process. Whenever product is named, we say to the invoicing, we say, hey, set product name displayed on invoice for this product. Obviously, we don't change the history. We just change for the new ones. Another process is whenever people add items to basket. This is an unusual requirement. This is more for those businesses which, I don't know, I've heard about those fast food chains where when you use the kiosk to choose the order, it automatically appears on the kitchen, on the preparation side, so that they can most likely prepare you the food, even though you can still delete it, but it's time effective for them to prepare it. So whenever people add items to basket, to order, we prepare the shipment. That's like very specific process, and also shows like this is not very processes are not exactly at the domain level. They are between the application level and the domain level because those are very specific to the project, very specific to the business. So this might make sense in McDonald's. This will not make sense for e-commerce. And this is the code responsible for it. So whenever item is added to basket, in the shipping, they call it shipment picking list. So we'll create a list of the shipment list. It's not yet delivered, it's just waiting, but we'll add it. And when item is removed, we remove it. So in many ways, those processes, they kind of synchronize the data between domains. So, and there is some duplication. I will agree that there is some duplication in terms of data, but there is a nice separation in terms of business logic. So you want to handle shipment separately from ordering. There are many such processes. This is from my project. This is like a simulation of e-commerce. So you may want to check availability when item is added to basket. You want to determine the VAT rate. There's a shipment process. Yeah, so a bunch of them, even more of them. So even for a quite simple e-commerce simulation project, we already have like, I don't know, 25 or 30 processes. And they solve the problem of communication between these domains. And they kind of allow us that if we take those existing domains, the typical domains, usually what we would have to do is to configure the coordination between via processes. So the domains could be reusable. OK, let's go back to the service objects, because we didn't have all the answers yet. We have this form in our project. It's a new product with name, price, and VAT rate. 3 UI controls. How many commands you think are coming from those 3 controls? 3 would be the obvious answer, but there's actually 4. The code that we see is actually from the controller, because once the service objects are not really needed because they are just mappers from params to commands, I'm tempted often to just leave this code in the controller. But it's fine if it would be part of the service object as well. And you can see there are just some simple, actually it's lacking the UI validation, so the form object idea that we've had the talk yesterday about form objects, it's still a good idea. Form objects, they could be used just before the service object, but form object, they shouldn't save data. That's a bug in thinking. OK, so what happens in this code later? Those methods are called, and those methods are called so you can see the commands are called. And the commands are basically just instantiations of the command objects. So this UI maps, it could be mapped to a form object, it could be mapped to a service object, and the service object role is to find the commands that we want to run to the domains, and that's all. So that's all that is left about the service object. And this answers several questions here. So what does a service object return? Nothing. In Java, void. We don't have this concept in Ruby, but you can understand that you don't rely on the return value. How do you test it? It's easy. You just pass the params, and you expect what kind of commands were created on the command bus. What was the answer? OK, do you have call and execute or execute? It doesn't matter. So it's becoming so simple that many answers are obvious. OK, some conclusions. This is a heated debate, not really my topic for today, but so many people are wondering, OK, how can we have juniors in the Rails applications? And that's a usual claim against doing DDD in Rails, because for some reasons people think that if you have a big ball of mud, it's easier for juniors, but if you start modularization, it's more difficult for juniors. So I would say it's probably the opposite. And I think that juniors will find it much easier if they start with some very simple tickets to work on, which just touch one read model at the beginning. And they will focus on one component at a time, and then slowly they will work on more and more. Second thing, I'm not a big fan of estimates, but I know sometimes you can't expect them. And with modular code base like this one, when you have some building blocks, and this is just one idea how we can modularize it, is more estimation friendly because you can easily map requirements into building blocks. So if you obviously, probably it's difficult to get to this point of this modularity, but maybe for your next project you will start better. I think it's worth learning how to detect typical domains. So just to look for the typical concepts in your code base, so that even though you don't have these reusable domains in your code, maybe yet I don't have them too, at least you will recognize them and you know that they might have their own place in your code base as a module. This is a bit futuristic thinking, but because I'm not there yet as well, but given that those domains, they have all the features of something that could be reusable, they could be reusable in the future. So hopefully, when we meet here in 5 years from now, we will have gems, open source gems for pricing, for shipment, for ordering. I'm not saying I will create them, but at least we will have them available because right now we don't have them and we create them all from scratch over and over again. And that's why our code is different. And yes, we can configure them with processes. We've had a great talk from Jaroslav today. And it was about components, view components, and hotwire. And read models are hotwire friendly. So because read models under the hood, usually they use, as you saw in the example, they use active record. And you can just connect your active record with hotwire. So you can use those callbacks from hotwire, and it will be broadcasted, for example, to the view. I'm not yet experienced with hotwire, but the way I understand it is that it's fitting perfectly well with the concept of read models, so those small boxes on your pages where you display the data, so that we don't have to use React. Also, important thing, read models don't know about each other. Many projects I see go this way when you have dependencies between read models because it's so tempting to say, here is a list of products, so I will just grab the list of products from this read model and then I will use them in some kind of report, for example. So it's better to have like denormalized and decoupled from each other read models and treat them as separate modules. Also for example, for juniors to have better understanding how it works separately. Service objects, just as a repetition, are mappers from params to commands. Commands are input to the domains. Domains can produce events. Events are the triggers for processes. Processes can trigger new commands. Events are also a trigger for read models. And that's the whole loop for the application. So I know for many of you, those building blocks may sound like a bit science fiction right now. But this whole event-driven approach actually is simple. And most of the tickets that you work on can be easily mapped into those concepts, and you know where to put code. Important thing, form objects are not for saving, but Apotonic is not here, so he still will not learn. Okay, here maybe don't show it to DHH, but params-driven development is just not the right way. Like whether you go with service objects or not, basically, what I see in the code bases, and I see many of your code bases too, I see that you just add a param at the top of your control flow, so somewhere at the controller, or even better in the form or in the view template, or it comes from JavaScript, and somehow magically this param goes everywhere, like a bunch of params goes everywhere. And this is you should be more granular. So it's not update user, you change your email. And Adrian, Rails engines belong to the application layer. And active admin and Avo are OK, only if they can allow connecting to service objects or commands. So you can answer whether Avo is fine. OK, thank you. Yeah, if you're using things like active admin or Avo, I don't really know them exactly very well. I mean, I tried active admin and I deleted it immediately after I tried. Because they just try to make this magic for you. Like Avo tries to find you all the models, and then it will try to magically create UI for them, probably. So you will create active records directly, and this is exactly what you don't want to have. I mean, it's good. Like we talked with Adrian about this. It's good because, for many, Rails programmers are how did you call them? Shippers and builders. Yes, so some people ship quickly, and obviously with active admin you ship quickly. So if your goal is to ship stuff in 1 week, then this is your tool to choose. But if you want to somehow manage this later, probably you want to remove it later. Okay. Mapping requirements to those building blocks is easy. Unit testing. Domains are units. The input is clear, commands, output, events, or output is an exception. Read models are units. The input is events, the output is some kind of data structure or HTML or JSON. Processes are units, the input is events, the output is commands. It's all very easily testable. Those are units. Not some, like, you don't write tests for each class, for example. Integration testing. You can treat your whole application as black box, where service objects are the input and read models are the output. And you no longer care about, at this level of integration, don't care about what are the domains inside. When Pavel had his talk about event sourcing, there was a question about GDPR, and this is a solved problem with events. You encrypt events. And if someone wants to have deleted data, you delete the key, which was used to encrypt. There's a link to Rails Event Store. We have a documentation page about how to do GDPR with Rails Event Store. This is the event browser, which comes with Rails Event Store. It's a UI. It's actually written in Elm. And this is something that once you start using it, it basically reduces your debugging time to a minimum, because you know exactly what happened at one point of time. So if you have granular events, granular commands, and use some kind of UI for the events, then you can quickly see where was the problem. And a bold claim ahead. Who here uses Rails Event Store so far? Yeah, 15 people maybe, good. Rails Event Store is most productive tool for DDD, not only in Ruby. I've compared this to how you use DDD in Java and .NET and Python. In Python, they almost have this concept of not existing. So yeah, obviously I'm biased. I'm one of the people behind Rails Event Store. Okay, if you want to learn more, go to the Rails Event Store e-commerce repository. Just clone this repository. It's a simple order management system / e-commerce. There is no JavaScript, so you can easily add new tickets. And before you start experimenting with those concepts in production, in your client projects or your products, first experiment in this code base. So you can choose one of the existing good first issue tickets on GitHub on this project, or just ask me if you want to add something, or just do something on your machine just to experiment with this, whether you can find yourself in such code bases and how to do it. Our plans for this project is to reuse domains in client projects. So I was talking about reusability. I'm not the one to make an impression that it's already happening, but we are very close to reuse some of the domains in our client projects. And a reminder, RKNC takes existing legacy Rails code bases and we turn them into something nicer over time. So we very easily spot all those domains in the existing project that we worked on. We want to work on Hanami application, which is actually in progress. So we want to show that the domains could be reused not only in Rails, but also in Hanami, because there's no coupling to Active Record. I would like to have less boilerplate code for the read models processes, but I think we are doing quite well anyway for now. And I would like to create a scaffold generator for Rails applications together with the domain, so that you can easily start. You can say, I have pricing, I have inventory, I have shipment, I have such read models, I have such processes, and have it generated, because all this code is already written and you shouldn't write it over and over again. And that's it from me. Thank you very much. And this conference is about confronting ideas, so if you disagree with me, have a lightning talk and say how you disagree with me. But obviously, I will take questions now.
Hi, Andrzej. You were a big fan of aspect-oriented programming, but it failed. And what's the reason? What do you think?
At the Rails framework level, even DHH, when he was promoting Rails in 2004, he was like showing how many of those concepts are AOP. So if you use Rails callbacks, it's basically AOP. In Java, AOP is part of Spring, so it's quite successful there. If you look at how I showed you, so what is AOP? AOP is trying to find some separation of concerns where you say, whenever this happens, do this, right? That's basically the AOP approach. So then they say, before this happens, do this, or after this happens, do this. And with domain-driven design, we solve it basically by saying we have an event, so after the event happens, we do this. We don't have a concept of before the event happens, do this, but it's very rarely required. So I would say we are kind of simulating AOP here with DDD. Thanks for your question.
Hey, you said that GDPR is now solved in Rails event store. But if we were only encrypting them, then the encryption key are still present in backups. So how to handle that? Because there is limited time we have to forget the user.
Don't remember exactly how we have this in our project. Probably we don't put them in the backups, or we store them somewhere else.
But are those events, like all data in event is encrypted?
The ones that you need, the personal data.
Okay, so only the PAIs.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Hello, I have two questions. The first of all is, you mentioned that you guys do a lot of legacy rewrites in terms of taking something that is written well, kind of bad, and rewriting into a domain-driven design. But in this particular case, you have already know the domain, and you can easily identify the particular components. But in my experience, if you do modularization, you usually, the worst cause you can have, and especially in the microservices, but also in other kinds of modularization, misidentifying the domains and rewriting them to match the processes. What are your experiences with such cases in which you misidentified the domains and had to re-architecture them?
Yeah, it depends like what kind of modularization technique was used. I was once involved in a project where they immediately started with microservices, and they were so certain about the domains that they put each domain in another microservice, and it was a really bad split. So over time, what we did was we merged back those microservices into the monolith, and then we remodularized them into something better. I would say it can be a trap that you start modularization too early when you don't know. But if you start learning those and identifying those concepts that I mentioned, like at least the generic domains that were listed today, if you have a price, you have a pricing. There's no questions about it. If you have a payment, you have payments. There are specific domains and they are generic. I don't think it would be dangerous to go with this modularization from the start, because they are there.
Okay, so broad strokes, and then you specify further.
Yeah, but just don't go with some crazy modularization techniques like microservices or engines or stuff.
Okay, and second question is that you mentioned that this kind of approach is junior-friendly. I kind of sort of disagree with at least parts of it, and the reason for this is that if you look at this application from a perspective of a junior developer, it doesn't really match the thing that you have and all the Rails tutorials, courses, and anything. So it's kind of, I would say, experience shock for them to see this kind of a thing. And I think that this will at least affect some ability to deliver code for them. Would you agree?
I mean, it's always a matter of choice, right? So either you have this, if you have a smaller Rails application, as from tutorials, it's easy for juniors, so I agree it's better for them. But if you have like the existing, I see the Rails projects, many of them, and when you have a 1,000 line of code class, then it's a bit of a problem for juniors, and we all know that that's not the smallest classes that we see, right? So with these building blocks, they help you structure your thinking, and I can agree that it requires some time to explain to juniors, but usually those building blocks, those classes, will not be bigger than 100 lines of code if you do it well. So I will claim that this is easier.
Another question. Do you think it makes sense to do DDD without event sourcing?
I mean, the event sourcing part is optional, so you can do it without. But I would say DDD without event-driven this would be problematic. I wouldn't like to do it. But event sourcing is just a detail. Event sourcing is just a persistence mechanism. That's at least to my definition. So this means that we somehow want to save the state of the object, of the business object. And you can do it with active record if you really, really like. And then you publish the event. So you still publish the event, but you persist the state as active record, which is basically a duplication because you have those events and you have those, if you have those small objects, then event sourcing is becoming like an almost transparent thing to you. You don't really care about it. So I'm choosing to go with event sourcing always, but it's okay, mostly for existing applications where existing stuff is usually active record, you usually start with publishing events, and only later, usually at the end, you will think about whether to go event sourcing or not. That's the last choice.
So if I decide not to do event sourcing in your approach to building software, where would I read from the database? Would I read this in the domain or in the command handler?
You would still use read models because event sourcing is only for building the objects. You will still do event driven, and you would publish the events, and the read models will subscribe to events. And the read models, they are persisted in a database, so they are not event sourced. They are just event driven, which means they are still using the database.
But I think in yesterday's presentation, it was said that you should not use read models for business decisions, only for reading.
Oh, sorry, I thought that you were just for exposing. So, yeah, it's you can build like all the source of truth is in the events. So you need to you would need to either persist the state of like whatever data you want to access for your decision. You can persist it in an active record in the last state of this, and you can access it. So there is no requirement to do it only via event sourcing. So this is more like an infrastructure requirement to me, whether you do event sourcing or persistent to a database. It's not really a business decision, or not really like this is a technical detail. So I would say you can, like for example, the process managers, they can be event sourced if you want to build their state. If they are composed of many events, but it's okay if you have active record backed persistence, and it's also fine.
Okay, thank you for your answer.
Thanks.
Thank you for your presentation. One question. You mentioned that products in all your units are units. So how you test it? Do you mock dependencies, or maybe you use substitutions, or maybe you have some third option to test and to mock the dependencies for your tests?
I mean, did you ask for a specific building block or just in general?
In general, because if you have a unit, it probably has some dependencies with other units. So you have two options, at least I know two options, substitutions and mock the dependencies. Maybe you have anything else.
Usually, okay, so I will try to avoid the coupling to other units as much as possible, but sometimes you have to go for it. I will just usually use some kind of fake object. So I will just, it can be a stub, for example. So you will just say, okay, what is how the unit responds, and that's all of this that you need. The nice thing with commands and events is basically all the building blocks are either event-based or command, like they either produce events or they produce commands. For example, processes produce commands or services produce commands. So all you need to do is to check the command bus, whether the command, and you can use like a fake command bus to check whether the command was there or whether an event was there. So that's usually all you assert, the events or commands.
Thanks.
Okay, so maybe last question so that we don't...
Hi, at first, thank you for your talk, and I really appreciate that you put it in an easy way and self-explanatory, so I feel very encouraged to give it a try. Even I'm looking for some new kind of architectures to try. And I've got two questions. First of all, I see when you saw a few examples of commands that for sometimes in initializers you call another commands on another service objects. And I'm just wondering, with all those talks about dependency injection and craziness about it, so is this policy like if those services or commands belong to the same model, the same domain, then you can call each other from each other?
Service objects never call each other. command is handled by one specific domain and never handles, like the command is never handled twice, or a command handler never calls another command directly. So all the communication happens that if you deal with one command, it will result in some events. And then those events can be triggering, because we are using PubSub. So there will be triggering some new, like the read model will try to react to it to save a new data, for example. So this is like not, the dependency injection is a very important pattern, but with such building blocks, it's not really often used, because you have less dependencies. You have so strong decoupling that you don't need the dependencies as much. But if you do, then dependency injection is a good pattern.
Mm-hmm. And the second one, do you feel like when you build such an architecture from scratch, do you feel it's an overhead from the beginning? Because my obvious question was how to face it with the business part of the project, to explain that it will be a little bit slower than, for example, using Railsway at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And of course, we know that it will pay back in the future, because the project will be probably better maintainable. But still, at the beginning, it might be a little bit slower in building.
Yeah, it's an important question, and it's hard to answer easily. My mission is to simplify this stuff so much so that people will be so effective as they are with the Railsway. The goal, I think, we are a bit, our ecosystem, the business ecosystem around Rails projects and expectations for Rails programmers is weird, because we are so fast during the first weeks, and then we slow down so dramatically. And it's always like hard to explain to the business people, like what happened after 3 months. You were so quick in the first weeks, like, okay, what's the problem? And I think we are sometimes, I don't know, seducing the business people by how fast we are with Rails, with Avo, with Active Admin, how quickly it's created. And then only we know that there is a technical debt. The business people usually are not communicated that we are taking shortcuts. So my mission is to simplify the DDD part and the ecosystem, the tooling, so that you can be very, very quick with this. And there's still, like, okay, I said, there's still Rails parts. So the Rails parts are the views, like, for example, the hotwire, if you go with this approach. So all this stuff is still like Rails. So you can still be quick. But obviously, there is some code to be written, and there is usually like more boilerplate code. So you create commands and events, and usually you don't need that. But also, usually you are not limited to your typing speed, right? So it's not that you are spending time typing commands and events. It's more about getting used to it and then do it quickly, so that you start thinking in those terms, and the typing time is not relevant usually. And when you have this code actually typed and it's very explicit, I've had some conversations recently, like how even in a Rails legacy code base, they just started introducing events gradually, and there was just one event for changing the price of a product, and this would be hard to implement in typical Rails way approach, where you would like to send emails to clients that the price has changed. And with events, it's basically one-line handler, right? So just send email about this new price. So over time, you can build with events and gradually replace. But if you start from scratch, unless you, and that's why I created the e-commerce project, unless you experiment somewhere else, you will not be so fast as with Rails, like not overnight.
Thanks so much.
Thanks. Okay, I think it's enough. So thank you for your attention. You were a great audience. See you after lunch.